In this section, we're going to look at how you can use the architect function in Essentials for Office 365 to understand the taxonomy of your SharePoint environment. So this will become a bit clearer as we work through some examples. So first I'm going to click on the Architect tab, and then in the navigator I'm going to browse down to a site collection that I want to work with, in this case Meta 1. I'm going to double click on it to load the taxonomy. So there's a couple of things going on now. I'm going to explain each section. So the bottom left section is the outline. That shows what you're currently viewing, or which part of the taxonomy you're currently viewing. The middle section here shows a more focused view or zoomed in view of that, and the bottom section shows the properties of whatever's selected. So if I select perhaps this box here, the page, that then changes to show the properties of the page. Now, if you're unfamiliar with SharePoint taxonomy and how it works, this might look a bit strange to you, but I can explain a little summary of how that works using the diagram. So content types in SharePoint inherit from one another. So as I pan down here, the parent of all content types really is the item content type. So if you see here, these sections underneath are all different types of items. Now, if I pan a little bit to the left, you see that the document content type is inheriting from the item. So a document is, or the document content type is a type of item. And then as we pan down here, we can see the different types of document. And as I go to the right, there's one that I've created here called the Meta 1 document, which is a type of document inheriting from the document content type and has some additional columns such as the percentage complete, meta country, meta department, and status. If I click on that, then the properties of that sit down in the bottom box here. So that's a nice visual representation of the taxonomy of that site collection, but there's more things you can do within this view. So you can edit and change existing content types. So for example, I could add an additional column to the Meta 1 content type, perhaps a string of text. So in order to do that, I click here on the left, string. I move across onto the content type, click onto it. And you see now it's prompting me to enter a name for this column. So I'm going to enter example string 1. I hit enter. So that has now been added to the model, but hasn't been added to SharePoint yet. That's a later step we'll come to. Within this view, you can also add new content types. So I could create a new content type. Again, I click here and drop on the diagram where I would like it to be. So it's going to be down there. I'm going to call it example content type. And I can also set inheritance from here. So I can say I want that to inherit from the Meta 1 document content type. So I click on inheritance, click on the content type, and drag up to the one I want it to inherit from. So now example content type is inheriting from the Meta 1 document content type. And then I can add some additional columns to that, like a string and maybe a choice column as well. So from here, now I've made my changes to the diagram, I can consider moving those changes into SharePoint. Now, in order to do that, firstly, I need to do a comparison report. So I click up to here and I can either compare with the last version, which is the version I just loaded, and that is much quicker, or I can compare with the latest version of SharePoint. So this will run a comparison to see what the changes are between what I've changed in the diagram, or sorry, what the differences are between the diagram I have in front of me and what's currently live in SharePoint. So if I click on that, that will then examine the SharePoint environment and determine where the changes are. So when that loads, then we can view the compare view at the bottom down here. And if there are certain changes that it's observed that we want to now push to live, so from our diagram into live, we can push them from there. So when the differences appear in the compare view here, there's several actions I can take on those differences. So firstly, I can locate the difference on the diagram to observe what it is. If I've made several changes, I might want to go and reference them before pushing them to live. This next button here will locate the change in the navigator on the left here. And from there, we have the option here to update SharePoint. So what this will do, it will update your SharePoint environment in Office 365 with the changes you've made on your diagram. So in the case of this example, it will add that status column, it'll add the example string column to the Meta 1 document, create this new content type with these new columns, and will associate that as inheriting from the Meta 1 document. We also have the option here to update the diagram. So if we've run a comparison report and it's showing some new changes in SharePoint that currently aren't reflected on the diagram, we can select those and have it update the diagram. So that's currently current. And finally here we have the option to show the compare report or refresh the results if we've been working for a while. So once we've made those changes in the diagram and we've identified them in a comparison report, we have the option to push them to SharePoint if required. So within this view, we can also display a sitemap and create subsites if required. An additional option you have with the taxonomy diagram is to save as an image. So if I click on save as an image, I can choose to save this diagram as perhaps a JPEG and then open it in maybe Paint or image viewing package and observe the whole diagram. And that's useful if you want to include it in a presentation or such. You also have the option here to print the diagram directly. So that's an overview of the architect functionality within Essentials, how we can view the taxonomy, make changes, and then push those changes to our SharePoint environment.